I'm Eric Topol, and with my co-host Abraham Verghese, we are especially delighted to welcome Professor Roberto Burioni from Italy to talk to us about the pandemic and his experience in dealing with vaccines and anti-science. And this is really quite an opportunity. I want to just start introducing a little bit about Professor Burioni's background. He's a virologist at the San Raffaele University in Milano. He was very serious, is still a very serious scientist, but back in 2016, something happened where he changed course. He was on television and he had two anti-vaxxers, a very famous actress and a former DJ, who were taking on vaccines. And he then was given at the very last moment a chance to respond on television. And he said, "The earth is round, gasoline is flammable, and vaccines are safe and effective. All the rest are dangerous lies." And those were called the 13 most beautiful words heard on TV. And this changed the course and has prepared Professor Burioni to be ready for the pandemic, ready to teach us all about how to deal with these issues. So welcome, Roberto.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you. And I'm saying hello to all the listeners of this podcast from all around the world. I think that the problems we are facing are common. Anti-science is gaining foothold everywhere. And this is very dangerous, as the experience of this pandemic told us clearly. Science is the only thing who can save us. So it's very important to trust in science. It's very important to trust in pharmaceutical, in vaccines, because I always say that drugs are a little bit like money. You give your stuff in exchange of pieces of paper. That you do this because you trust that these pieces of paper will have a value. And so you think that with these pieces of paper, you will go somewhere and you will buy what you want. But it's only a matter of trust, because you can't, tell that the paper is a value. It's a trust. You trust that paper and other people is trusting that paper. The same is with vaccine. We can't really know what's inside a vial of vaccine. We have to trust. We have to trust doctors. We have to trust authorities. And we have to trust also, let's say, pharmaceutical companies that are not so careful about communication. So what's really a little bit worrying, at least here in Italy, is the skepticism that is growing about some of the vaccines, in spite of very good data. And this really should prompt everybody, and mainly authorities and pharmaceutical companies, to think what's the way they use to share their good work, basically, because they provided very good vaccines. But here in Italy, there is the perception that some of the vaccines are not so good, they are not safe, that they are not second choice, and this is very bad.
Right.
Dr. Burioni, it's such a pleasure to be talking to you. You strike me as having much in common with my co-host in the sense that both of you are not at all afraid to speak your minds. You were quoted saying about Italy that it's a country wobbling between science and superstition. And I would think that in America, it's very similar, except we're not wobbling between science and superstition, but science and suspicion, especially fueled by social media. You've spent a lot of time in the United States at the CDC and also at Scripps. Do you have any thoughts on what is different in terms of sort of the anti-vaccine sentiments in the US and Italy, or is it very much the same phenomenon?
I can find a huge difference between Italy and the US, which is in favor of US. One of the problems we are facing here in Italy is that a strong institutional voice is absent. I'm telling just what happened a few days ago. A guy, a music teacher, died after vaccination, which is unfortunate. But in Italy, we have doctors, they know it perfectly, around 50,000, deaths from cardiac arrest, there are instant deaths a year. So, I mean, that somebody dies after a vaccination is something that you can really see as not completely, strange. Well, a judge just seized all the vaccine lot from which the vaccine administered to this person was coming from. And now that vaccine lot is still seized while autopsy demonstrated that this guy had, a cardiac problem. So vaccine had nothing to do. So I don't know why we have this kind of, we need vaccines because we don't have so many vaccines. And these vaccines are seized. I don't know. They are probably waiting. They will expire. So they will be completely useless. I mean, we don't have a strong institutional voice. There is not a voice from the health minister or from the, Secretary of Health, from the NIH. We have the Istituto Superiore di Sanità. I'm not telling that they are not good. They are good, but they are not heard. I mean, in the modern world, you need to be heard. I mean, I always taking papillomavirus vaccine as an example. Scientific data are absolutely clear. You have a vaccine which is extremely safe. We have a vaccine which is extremely effective in preventing cancer. I'm not meaning about, something that, you're not scared about. Everybody's scared about cancer, including myself. So this vaccine is safe, effective, and in Italy is completely free of charge. I mean, it's administered through our national health system. Well, in spite of the fact that the vaccine is demonstrated to be safe, the vaccine is demonstrated to be extremely effective, the vaccine is free. More than 50% of the people are refusing this vaccination for their children. Now, at this point, I'm asking you, I am an immunologist, I am a virologist, I spend my life working on human monoclonal antibodies and thinking about vaccines, but is my work at the moment to produce a better vaccine when we have a very good vaccine and 50% of the people are refusing it on the basis of superstition, on the basis of misinformation, on the basis of I don't know what? So really, my father, who is 92, now he's retired, but he was a pediatrician, and he stopped working on the year 2000. Well, in his entire life, he never had a patient, a single patient, refusing vaccine. I mean, if he was working now, it would be a tragedy because so many people are refusing vaccines. And the bad is that people refusing vaccines are completely irrational. Their choice is not made on the basis of rational reasoning. So it's very difficult to convince them. Almost impossible, I would say. But the problem is that they are not so many, but they scare other people. I'm a very reasonable person, I think, as all of you. But if I am in a movie theater and somebody screams, well, there is a bomb, well, I run away. I run away even if I am a very reasonable person. If I have with my daughter, I take my daughter away. Then we will go back. So to scare people is very easy, very easy, very easy. And we are seeing also now what's the problem. Once again, I'm telling the problem of Italy, which is a very, it's not something that came out now. We faced a very, unfortunate episode like, quack cure for cancer that were sort of approved by or studied by our authorities, our FDA, which is called IFA, and other very, very unfortunate episodes. Oh, well, I'll just summarize. There was a court ruling, our Supreme Court ruling, that a soldier with leukemia had leukemia because too many vaccines were administered to him. So just tell me how can a doctor say this is not true? Well, they say, well, the Corte Costituzionale, which is the Supreme Court in Italy, ruled that way. So the problem is that, not only, our state, meaning, our government is a little bit wobbling sometimes, has been wobbling between science and superstition. Things, they improved. I have to admit that they improved, but they are not perfect. Right. A few days ago, in Piemonte, one of the most important Italian regions, they approved the use of hydroxychloroquine for COVID, for the treatment of COVID-19, which is unbelievable. They approved it, actually. Now it's approved. Now, in this very moment when I'm talking to you, is approved. So, the state is paying for it.
Wow. Wow. Well, let me ask you, because this is a lesson for all of our listeners, Roberto. That is, up until you were in your 50s, you were, as you say, a hardcore academician. You were a virologist, immunologist, a pioneer of monoclonal antibodies. And then you added another dimension to your arc of your career. That is to take on, long before the pandemic, this is years before, you say, I'm going to take on the anti-science movement and the anti-vaccines. And now you've been obviously engrossed in this. Do you encourage others to do this? Is the net effect something that you would advocate, or are there regrets?
Well, I think I felt this as a duty. I think that being a tenured professor, you are granted a lot of privilege compared to other workers because you're safe in your job, relatively safe in your job. But I think that this fact to be a tenured professor brings also responsibility. You need to talk to people. You have the responsibility of facing, as a doctor, as a professor, as a citizen, what can be a very dangerous life for your country. I mean, in 2015, I realized, because I have a daughter, she's 9 years old, and so at that time she was 4, and I realized in their school that she was going to, it's called asilo here in Italy, the school where children from 3 to 6 they go, that there were parents refusing vaccinations, and this was very dangerous because in some parts of Italy, we were having a very low coverage for not only for measles and the other mumps and rubella, but also for polio. In some places, there were 80% coverage for polio, which is unbelievable. And I thought this was a real and current danger. I had to do something. So I realized that misinformation was spread by these people who were barely speaking and writing Italian. So I said, well, I can speak and write Italian because I'm more educated than they are, which is not very difficult, by the way. And so I say, why they are so vocal and we are all quiet. And so I started to present on Facebook what's very simple, because what I'm telling is something that as a medical student can easily tell. I'm not writing anything in particular special. Probably is the way that I'm writing. But I realized very soon that the language that was useful on the social media was completely different from the one we use, when we were in a conference with colleagues. Is very different from the one I use with my students. They come to my lecture, they already trust me, they already recognize myself as a professor. So, and also it's very different from what I say to my patient, because once you come to my office, once you come to my hospital, you already trust me. There is already a choice. Well, social media, people, they don't trust you, and you have the same level, than to anybody writing stupid things about vaccines. So you have to be convincing. You have to use another language, and you have to be convincing. You have to be. I mean, if you ask me, we are, in a group of scientists. You're asking me, is autism caused by vaccination? I would have to reply correctly that currently we have no proof that vaccination is causing autism, which is correct because we have no proof. But if you say this word to an uneducated audience, they will say, well, vaccine is causing autism, and still they don't know it because they don't have enough proof. So we have to be very careful about what we say. In this case, the form is the substance. And I realized that, humanity faced, changes in communication. First was the printing, and then was the radio, and then was the television. And now we have social media, which are very important in the formation of public opinion. And public opinion, where we are I mean, in US, I think you had a very, very unfortunate experience with the previous presidency. That social media, basically, lie and truth were the same. And fortunately, from a personal opinion, then things changed. But social media are very important in the formation of the public opinion. A public opinion, when we discuss about infectious disease, is very important because if people, they don't change their behavior, if they don't get their shots, I mean, you're going to lose against an infectious disease.
Well, you certainly have a savviness that in speaking to the public, which is something we can all learn from. I mean, this is something I think, as you said, more of us need to do that to help crowd out the lies and the false myths that are out there. Abraham?
Yeah, I'm just struck by the title of your second book. You said you called it A Conspiracy of Dunces, Why Science Cannot Be Democratic. And you really have, you have a wonderful way with words, and you don't pull your punches. You said, when I define someone as an idiot, it's not an insult, it's a diagnosis I offer for free. And I just want to ask you, there is a danger that at times you can actually push people back into being sort of more in their camp and more willing to resist than ever. Have you evolved your strategy as time has gone on? Have you learned some lessons on the way?
Yeah, I remain a scientist, so my only reason is guided by numbers, and I don't have numbers telling me that my communication approach works. I mean, I can say correlation, but I will never say that's causation. We would need a parallel Italy where Roberto Burioni is not speaking, has been speaking, and we don't have that. The word dances has been used by me because in Italian is donkey. We say somebody who is dancing is donkey. And I like opera very much, and there is the Cenerentola of Rossini that un somaro ma solenne, very important, donkey. So I use this word. And the story of the science, which is not democratic, I want to explain you how that came out, because that's important. It was the last day of 2016, the last day, December 31. I had my father in the emergency unit here at San Raffaele University after a cerebral hemorrhage. It was really in bad shape, so I was very worried. And from a let's say far right, group of people, here we had a meningitis problem here, and somebody started to say that this was coming from immigrants. I mean, the story from the right, extreme right, was we have meningitis killing our children because the immigrants are bringing this back in Italy. Well, I started hearing this at the radio, at the television, so I took my time and I was listening. Immigrants can bring in Italy anything, but not meningitis, because the strain of meningitis which are present in Italy and are causing the disease are not the same that are causing the disease in Africa. So they are different. So, I mean, you can blame them for everything you want, but not for meningitis, because this is simply not true. And one of this guy, I always put references of the articles I use for making my statements, because always that's something I did from the very beginning. This guy tried to read this article, and he didn't understand that the type of the meningococcus was the same, the C type. But the strain was completely different. So there were two different strains, even with the same letter. And so this guy said, oh, Roberto Burioni is saying lies because this is not true. At that point, I was really fed up. And I said, listen, I'm not here to discuss science with somebody who is not the basis for discussing. I mean, I don't speak German. So I cannot discuss about a translation from German to Italian, because I don't speak German. It's not because I'm stupid, because I didn't study German. So, I mean, I know a little bit of English because I've been living in the US, but I don't know a single word of German. So you cannot discuss if you don't have the basis of that is needed for undertaking this discussion. So I said science is not democratic, meaning that you cannot decide the dosage of an antibiotic by, with a poll or with an election. Science is telling you that you need that particular amount of amoxicillin, and that's it, period. So this is what tells me. Oh, regarding the fact of pushing people on their side, I have this is my personal opinion, and I would like to underline that it's my personal opinion. I think that there is a small percentage of people you will never be able to convince. I mean, they are completely irrational. And as we all only have rational arguments, it's impossible to convince them. But there are not so many. They also presented a list at the last elections, and they gained about 0.7, 0.8%. But why, in the places where they are particularly active, vaccination rates dropped 20%, not of 1%, because they scare other people. So I think that you cannot convince the really, hardcore anti-vaxxers, but you can ridiculize them. You can show other people how stupid they are and how fake their statements are, how ignorant they are. And you have to demonstrate this. I think that this can have effect. So to be blunt with these people will not affect them. They will never change. It's like, to be a religious fanatic, you will not change them because it's believing something which is not rational. But all the other people that are scared by this, saying, saying anything about vaccination, but also about any other issues. The moment you show how stupid they are, I think that, this can have an effect. Once again, this is my opinion. What's a downside of this is that, this is exposing you. This exposed me publicly, and I received threats. My daughter received threats. I had, police in front of the school it's a public school where my daughter is going. I had a police detail for a period, and so this was really unpleasant. And I must say that to be famous is something that you don't put into account if you want to be a professor or a doctor. I mean, you think about being famous with your colleagues for what you're doing, to be known in a small circle. And it happened that now I'm known by everybody. So this is a little bit of discomfort. But there is one thing which is surprising in a very good way. I'm participating now to this very popular talk show on the Sunday nights in the Italian state television. And I always give a small lecture, 6-minute lecture, which is very difficult because 6 minutes are very short. You have to fill them with what you want to say. And one evening I explain what's an mRNA vaccine. Another evening I explain what's a variant. Another evening I would explain what is how you can diagnose. Well, what's really incredible is that the peak of the audience is when I talk about science. So this is really surprising, in my opinion, because I had the idea that science is considered to be boring by people, by the general audience. They prefer, comedians or singers or actors. It's not true. If you present them science in a way they can understand it, I mean, people, they like science.
Medicine and the Machine will be right back.
Welcome to Medscape's latest podcast series, Medicine and the Machine, featuring Medscape's editor-in-chief, Dr. Eric Topol, and master storyteller and clinician, Dr. Abraham Verghese. Remember, you can find the latest in medical news, expert perspectives, clinical tools, continuing medical education, and more at medscape.com.
Well, I've seen you in action. I've seen the show. I joined with you on one of the shows, and it's remarkable how you make the science so appealing, so easy to understand, and you charm them with the science, which is really, really important. And it's a somewhat different. And your book, Vaccines Are Not an Opinion, Vaccinations Explained to Those Who Really Don't Want to Understand. But what you do is you make it so clear. And these are best practices that we can learn from, here in the United States, because we face similar obstacles, even though you've been kind about the potential gradient between Italy and the US. Now, maybe we could get to the situation of the pandemic in Italy. You in Italy and us in the US were among the worst hit in the world. And now you have started another ascent in spread, and we are about to do that as well. Perhaps the same theme of a variant, the UK B117 variant. Uh, so I'd like to get your views about that and the vaccination issue in Europe in general and Italy specifically.
Well, unfortunately, we are facing a difficult moment because, in my hospital last week, 70% of the isolate were let's call it English variant, B117. This is a dangerous moment. What about vaccine? I mean, in the US, you're vaccinating really like there is not tomorrow. And here we are vaccinating at a very slower pace because first, bureaucracy is more, is more present. So, I mean, one afternoon, I volunteered personally myself at the vaccination center of my university because I think I was supposed to give the good example to all the other colleagues. So I personally went to vaccinate people. And I can tell you that, to vaccinate, it took me 1 minute, but 15 minutes were paperwork. And so, I mean, you can't vaccinate with paperwork. In 1973, we had a cholera outbreak in Naples. And in 1 week, they vaccinated, only in Naples, more than 1 million people.
Wow.
So what you can do is 1973,
Wow.
It's another word. So
Amazing.
I think we should do the same. The other problem is that Europe has not been as effective as the US, as the UK, and as other countries to secure the number of vaccines that is necessary. So, I mean, the problem is that we are behind in vaccination. So we struggle with lockdowns and with closures and with school open and closed. Now, in this very moment, schools are closed. And so basically, I think that, the route to say goodbye to this nightmare that affected the last year is to vaccinate. It's clear now. I mean, it's a miracle of having, effective, safe vaccines, which is absolutely, I mean, unbelievable. Because in 1 year, I would never dreamed it 1 year ago to have now a vaccine. So we have it. We have more than one. And so I think that, we should really have a faster pace. We had a government which was not extremely effective, in my opinion, in managing the situation. Now the government changed. It put in charge of the vaccination a very qualified person. He's a general of the army. He's a very well-respected person. And he was really, he was involved in the logistics in the army. And considering we are in a war, I think he's the most appropriate person to handle this emergency situation.
The way that go ahead, Abraham. Go ahead.
Sorry. We have people here in America arguing that in some cities like LA, we have already achieved herd immunity. I'm not sure that that's true, but is there any sense that you've had such a devastating first wave and second wave in Italy? Is there any sense that you have some degree of herd immunity from the degree of suffering that you went through?
Well, unfortunately, numbers are telling us that even in the places where we were hit in the most, let's say, terrible way, approximately 7%, 15% of the population was affected, which is far, far from what's needed to have an herd immunity, assuming that natural infection is providing immunity, which is not always true. I think I've seen in my practice many reinfections that are being clinically relevant, while I'm seeing infection of vaccinated people, but in my personal experience, they are not clinically relevant. And I see also from the huge paper that was published in New England Journal of Medicine describing the situation in Israel, that after 35 days from the vaccination, basically they have only asymptomatic or almost asymptomatic cases. Now, I think it would be important to know if these people are contagious, because if these people with very mild disease are not contagious, I would call them healthy people with a positive PCR.
Mhm. You know, you described it as a miracle, and I couldn't agree more, especially coming from you, who have spent your career and you know the whole landscape of vaccines. And you mentioned about the HPV vaccine, and this is in that same extraordinary group, kind of a superhuman result of immune response that is so unusual to get from a vaccine. But I had the privilege of working with you on an essay together about the variants and about how you assess the variants. There's so many variants. There's obviously been thousands of variants that have been noted over the course of the pandemic evolution. Only some of them have surfaced to some interest level of potentially worrisome. And you pointed out in the essay how we don't have standardized assays, that we have all sorts of claims, what I've called scariant, because they just scare people, even though they really aren't functional, these variants. Now, some of them are, as we discussed, as you say, the English variant, the South Africa, the 351 and the Brazil P1, but there's so many others. And even those have not been fully assessed. So can you comment about how we should have a standardized assessment and whether the vaccines work against these variants?
Well, to know if vaccine works against variants, unfortunately, there is no way other way than the clinical observation. I would like to remind that it's very difficult to establish a protection correlate. And also in the past, we had other vaccines that were very important, like the Salk vaccine, that was not sterilizing at all. We know that Salk anti-polio vaccine was providing an IgG only immunity, or IgG mainly immunity, and the relative lack of IgA in the gastrointestinal tube was allowing virus replication to a certain degree. But this vaccine has been fundamental and crucial for winning the fight against polio. So I think that we should observe from the clinical point of view if variants are able to cause disease in vaccinated people. Once again, variants are taking a foothold, are gaining a foothold when they have an advantage. The English one is very simple; it spreads a lot better. The Brazilian one was able to reinfect people who recovered from a previous infection. But Brazilian variant is able to a certain degree, overcome natural immunity. It's now clear beyond any doubt that the immunity which is elicited by these mRNA vaccines is incredibly strong. I mean, it's incredibly strong. It's something that has nothing to do with it. I mean, this is, in my opinion, what's more, two things about mRNA vaccine is unbelievable from the point of view of a vaccine specialist. First, the fact that they elicit an immunity which is so stronger compared to the natural infection. And second, and even more important, is how well they work in elderly people. Mm-hmm. I mean, flu vaccine is not working very well if you're over 70. And these are the people that are needing the protection most. So I think we have these wonderful tools. Now I think we have many vaccines, and so we have to use them all. But probably in the future, when vaccine supply will not be an issue anymore, we will choose the best one. And I'm confident that, in Latin we say ex malo bonum, from something bad, something good turns out. I think that mRNA vaccine technology will be very, very, very important in the future for other diseases, for other infectious diseases, and for other diseases in general. And so this explosion that we have now will be very beneficial in the future. In Italy now, we can see these variants, but we don't see at the moment clinical relevance in vaccinated people. Unfortunately, we see a lot more people getting sick. We see, this is one thing that, it's not so obvious. That this virus is incredibly contagious. Now, it's nothing to do with other viruses. I'm telling you, even in Italy, the flu season starts at the beginning of January and ends at the beginning of March. we are 60 million, and we have basically, depending on the flu season, from 5 to 8 million of cases. Our National Institute of Health is isolating every year something like between 4,000 and 6,000 of influenza viruses. Well, this year, the number of isolated influenza virus in Italy is 0. This is the first year in the history of Italy without influenza.
Mm.
I mean, other respiratory disease disappeared.
Mm.
Well, the usual respiratory disease that you see caused by adenovirus, by other coronaviruses, by, let's say, rhinoviruses, which sometimes are even annoying in small children. Well, this year basically disappeared. Pharmacies, they basically didn't sell any of the usual products that they sell, decongestant, antihistamine, the usually, over-the-counter drugs, because all the respiratory viruses have been killed by the precaution we took for COVID, but this was not enough to kill COVID. I mean, this is really an incredibly contagious disease, and this is even more contagious now with the English variant. So that's the difficulty of the fight, and that's why it's so important to vaccinate quickly and to vaccinate as much as we can. Really, that's the only way I can see for going out of this situation.
So I have a question that's really for both of you, because I don't know of any two people who are more on top of what's going on with virology. What do you see in the future, looking into your crystal ball? What is the next year going to look like in Italy and the US and globally?
Please, Eric.
No, I want to hear you. You're the authority. I'm the rookie.
I'm telling that's my personal opinion. It's very difficult to make provision in general when you talk about something that appeared in the world 1 year ago. And in this case, it's even more difficult because this thing that appeared 1 year ago is changing. So, today we have a virus which is different from the virus we had 6 months ago. Completely. It's a new virus with difference. We see also some differences in the symptoms that are present. So this virus is changing, which is, expected. Virus, they change, and probably the measles virus, when appeared in the 11th century, probably in the beginning, also he had many developed many variants, and then one variant, the best one, took the whole scene, and we see only that because we arrived afterward. Personally, I think that it will depend very much on the vaccination. If we will be able to vaccinate the majority of the people. We know that these viruses have a seasonality, at least in Italy, because we live a lot outdoor during the summertime. And I hope that we will be able to vaccinate as much people as we can. At that point, we will need to see what will happen to vaccinated people, because there are two possibilities. The first one is that, some variant will cause a clinically relevant disease, but this is not granted. We will have to see. And I personally think this is unlikely, because it's not very easy for a virus to escape such a strong immunity. We don't see any sign of escape at the moment. But, virus can be really unpredictable. So we have to be cautious. But then we have to see what will the current variants cause to the vaccinated patient. If the majority of them will be almost asymptomatic, and if the transmission will be reduced, it's very likely that we are going toward a world where once everybody is vaccinated, this will be the fifth coronavirus causing, let's say, not dangerous respiratory disease. Because all those will be vaccinated, we'll have the coronavirus with a COVID in a very clinical, mild form. And children will, grow up, or they will get this very contagious virus as they get other respiratory virus. They will develop an immunity, and then they will get vaccinated, and they will basically. I hope that this will become a mild respiratory disease, as it looks like it is already in the vaccinated people.
Right. We share the optimism for sure. Now, here's a difficult one, and it'll be interesting to get your explanation. So the UK variant is spread throughout Europe now, and there are very heterogeneous patterns. So Italy, Netherlands, now more Germany, certain countries, France, are showing the signs of a marked spread, whereas others, such as Denmark, Spain, show no signs, even though this is dominant in all these different European countries. What is the explanation for this disparity in the response or the pattern, do you think?
Well, one of the features of this virus, which is very uncommon and is not shared by other viruses, is the deep heterogeneity between the infectivity of infectivity between one patient and the other. There are patients that are not infectious at all. There are patients that are extremely infectious, and if they are in the wrong place at the wrong time, that particular virus can spread extremely well. So unfortunately, we have learned from experience that when something happens, at least in Europe, not more than 4 weeks after, 8 weeks after, it's everywhere. So this happened to the initial virus that was in Italy at the beginning of March, and then it spread in all Europe. And this was the case for, the wave that followed the summer, and in France and in Spain. And actually, we were seeing here in Italy a different strain, which was the Spanish strain, because many people from Italy went in vacation in Spain. They came back, they brought back many young people, many youngsters, that particular strain. So this should not surprise, given the fact that there are patients that are extremely infectious and that there are patients that are not infectious at all. You can see family units where one person got infected and the infection did not spread to other members of the family. On the other hand, you can see one person that was infectious, they went to a church, to a theater or somewhere, and that's a disaster. So I think this disparity can give a reason why there is this difference between one country and the other. I think that some differences are also between states in the US. So.
Right. Sure. Well, the other question for you is about the vaccines. There's many different vaccines now that have gone through these trials, big trials, and some have, the mRNA vaccines have an efficacy for symptomatic infection reduction of 95%, and others are 70%. And we'd like to see what you think. Is a vaccine, should people have respect for these efficacy numbers, or does it not matter?
Well, I think that, we should have a huge respect, because up to now, what was seen on the clinical trials has been perfectly replicated into, real life. Let's see, the Israel, not trial, because, the Israel, it was more than 1 million of people participating to that study. So really, the numbers were the same. I think that this moment we should look at two numbers, which are the most important one. The first one is efficacy against severe COVID-19 infection. That's very important, because the mild infection is not a problem, it's a discomfort, let's say. But I wouldn't say this is a medical problem. The severe infection is a great medical problem. Not only from the patient, but also from the health system. Delayed, the hospital are full of patients and so on. I think this is a very important number. And it seems like all vaccines, they work in a reasonably good way against severe infection. Then there is another issue, which is more complicated and is very important: effect on transmission. We need to know if any given vaccine is able to stop transmission. Because, if a vaccine is preventing the disease, but it's not preventing the transmission, it's only protecting the single person get the vaccine. If we have another vaccine that stops the disease, prevents the disease, but also stops the transmission, well, with that one, we can protect the community. I would personally say that from my experience as a virologist, I've never heard of a vaccine having 95% effect on preventing the disease, not having a profound effect on the transmission. There is not a single one that is not even, I wouldn't say blocking, but really being a huge obstacle to transmission. And the latest data from Israel are showing us that the RT went down to 0.5. So I think that really, I mean, this is really, even in presence of this terrible variant, which is, something that, it's too good to be true on my eyes, because this means that really transmission is affected. And this can be what's very important, because if transmission is affected, and if there is not a relevant animal reservoir, which I hope there is not, in the moment there is not, we have not seen it at least. I mean, if there is not an animal reservoir, and if transmission is affected by the vaccination, we can get rid of this virus. This is the real, this is the end of the story.
Well, final thoughts, Abraham, before I have a few?
No, I just want to thank you for being with us. Eric, go ahead.
Well, just Roberto, you're a gem. We learned so much from you today and every day. And for every person on Medscape listening, you're hearing wise words that are much more than just about the pandemic. It's about science. It's about speaking out to try to speak for the truth of science and making science exciting for everyone in simple words. And we know you've paid a price, as you said, Roberto, your family, for having stood out and tried to, defend the science. So all those efforts are greatly appreciated and we learn from. And we really appreciate your expertise also today in trying to interpret what's going on with this unpredictable virus. And the final chapter, which is one we aspire to get to quickly, which is everything's contained and this is a mild respiratory virus. So, Roberto, thanks so much. And we're going to follow you. And I know everyone in Italy does and the rest of the world, because we learned so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Roberto.
Thank you very much. It's been an honor.